Environmental impact assessment. This is an area that is changing rapidly in the current political situation of 2018. Environmental impact assessment is a major talking point around the world. So, first of all, it's a process of identifying the likely consequences. What's going to happen if we do something? Yeah, and probably the founding father of the theory of environmental impact assessments is a guy called Wathen, and what he wrote in the 1990s still holds very, very true today. Okay, so what is it really trying to say? The purpose of the EIA, it helps decision makers process by providing information about the consequence of development. It promotes sustainable development by identifying sound practices and mitigating, reducing measures for development. So some history. This is a place where the USA actually led the way. So NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, created an agency called NEPA, the National Environment Protection Agency. And it has to consider the environment in any land use planning. It gave the environment exactly the same status as economics, which was very, very important historically. Economics had always been seen as being the overriding consideration. With the current administration in the US, it has moved back to economics being the priority, and NEPA has been severely restricted over the last 2 years. So, following the formation of NEPA, other countries took up this. Canada was one of the first, Colombia, the Netherlands, United Kingdom. They're systematic processes, and the UN states that an EIA process has to contain each of these 8 accountabilities, each of these 8 features. They have to be transparent, there has to be certainty in them, there has to be participation in all groups, they have to be practical, there has to be flexibility in them, there has to be cost effectiveness, but probably the 2 most important, they have to be credible, they have to be based on reality and not on pretend made up scenarios. And they also have to be accountable, that if an EIA says something is going to happen and it turns out it doesn't, then somebody is responsible. Okay? So, an EIA, confusingly, the process of examining the impacts, yeah, but it also means the document that is the result of the examination. So, it's one of those interchangeable terms. So, they're used for, okay, national planning. Yeah, developments that need an EIA differ from country to country. So, Maasvlakte port development in Rotterdam, extending the world's 2nd largest port, needed an EIA. The area of land you can see in the map there, it's all brand new. It's all been created to build this port. That required an EIA. It provides baseline studies before the project starts. So, while the initial state approval was given for Maasvlakte, no development was carried out until October 2006 to allow a thorough EIA to be completed. Yeah? So the national government agreed to this development, but before the development could start, this EIA process had to be undertaken. So, as I've said, different places, different countries have different EIA expectations. But these are the things that might need an EIA. The images of a solar farm in South Wales. Now you'd think a solar farm was sustainable, but there was an EIA done before the solar farm, because obviously it was going to take environment, it was going to take landscape. What it was going to do was build a solar farm on top of what had been agricultural fields. And if you look beyond there, you can see there's actually a lot of the same sorts of fields in the area. So it was deemed that this was not really going to affect the environment in a large way and actually be a positive, so it was allowed to go ahead. So this is how it works. You set a structure of clear aims. The process has to occur during the planning, design and authorization stage of any development. It needs to happen before development starts. And it has to be very comprehensive. It has to address all potential impacts. It needs to focus on the significant issues. And there needs to be consultation and public participation. There's no point this happening unless the public are included. And the findings should be part of the final decision process. They should carry the same weight as economic considerations. It's often mainly concerned with the natural environment, but the effect on man should also be considered. So the Øresund Bridge between Denmark and Sweden required 2 different EIAs, one in each country, which also included an analysis of the economic, social and cultural impacts of this bridge. This bridge would mean that instead of it being almost an hour by ferry between the 2 countries, all of a sudden it would take 15 minutes. And that would have major economic and social impacts on both Copenhagen at one side and Malmo at the other side of the bridge. So they were taken into consideration as well. So it appears that there's this very, very big process, but the reality is it breaks down into realistically 4 main areas. Screening. Yeah, is an EIA needed and which impacts are going to be considered? So we screen so the EIA is focused. Identifying the impacts, what's the range of impacts, which is called scoping. Then predicting the scale of those potential impacts. And then looking at ways of limiting, mitigation, yeah? Any impacts that might arise. So what do you need to know? Well, you need some baseline data. What's the conditions like now? What effect do different phases of the project have? Different projects have different impacts at different times of their phases. Clearing the land to build an oil installation doesn't just result in the impacts from the oil installation, it results in the impacts of actually fell in the forest. So the phases of the EIA, baseline data is collected. This can be thought of as a project description. What are the conditions like now? Yeah, what does a project plan to do? So if you look at the development of the Rotterdam port, it's been built in stages and different phases. Maasvlakte 2 followed Maasvlakte 1, and Maasvlakte 1 was a development between 1970 and 2008. You know, that's a long development time. Maasvlakte 2, so these are phases of development of the port of Rotterdam as it's moved further and further away from the city centre. A description. Yeah, the physical characteristics, yeah. So again, if we look at this example from Rotterdam, the existing project area, what's it going to be like? What's going to happen? What's the production process? What waste products are going to happen? What's likely to be disturbed? Yeah. And alternatives, what different approaches exist? Yeah, why choose this one? Why choose this particular one? So this is a set of sand dunes that are actually only just up the coast from Maasvlakte. One of the things that was actually possible during the development of Maasvlakte was the ability to actually bring sand from the harbour construction and use it to help repair dune systems that had been damaged in major storms. But without Maasvlakte being built, Maasvlakte itself was a set of sand dunes. Would it have been better to have left it alone? Impact, what's the impact on this? Considering all the potential environmental impacts, whether good or bad. Building a tunnel for a train might increase the train's speed, but it may destroy very valuable habitat. So it has to be comprehensive, but also focus on what might be real problems. Impacts on the ecosystem. Yeah. The viaduct in France was designed to move traffic flow out of small villages and included major construction impacts as well as ecological impacts on the edge of the Alps. The building of this viaduct, which is a very large viaduct, actually was designed to reduce some of these ecological impacts on the edge of the French Alps. So there are some techniques that tend to be used, and they need to be systematic, comprehensive, but also flexible. They need to be able to take large amounts of data from different sources and put them together in a meaningful way. And they need to be based on a quantitative evaluation that's both accurate and objective. It's not just about how I feel about the situation. We need some real data that show what the impacts are and what they might be. So there's a checklist system. You can run your way through a set of checklists and check, is there a severity level, yes or no, is it major, is it minor, yeah? And they can be very thorough if they're well designed, but it's quite difficult to complete lots of checklists, yeah? Impact matrices, sometimes called a Leopold matrix, and again, it combines a checklist with a spreadsheet that gives a score, so cause and effect between the environmental feature and the activity can be thought of. So we actually look at the actions and what happens in them. Cost and benefit analysis. This is much more in the terms of economics, because it can really be difficult to add cost and value to ecosystems. Yeah? What is the cost of removing an ecosystem? It's very hard to say. Evaluation techniques compare various possible scenarios. So the Twyford Down cutting in Great Britain was a scene of major protests in the 1990s. Campaigners suggested other alternatives, but the UK government pushed ahead with their preferred plan. So sometimes even the EIA process is not seen as being strong, depending which side of an argument you've come in from. What scale will these impacts have? How big is the impact? What's the duration? How long is it going to last? And using magnitude, extent and duration together, it's possible to analyse impacts of various scenarios for most projects. So how big is this impact? How wide an area does it affect? And how long is it going to last? Yeah? The building of a new airport might have a short-term construction impact, but the noise levels from landing planes is a long-term and will affect a bigger area. So you've got different levels of impact. Criticism of EIAs. Okay, one of the biggest criticisms is that there's not always a requirement for all projects. So depending where you are in the world, depending on the government situation, major projects may happen without any assessment being done. There's no agreed standardized approach or methodology. Different environmental impact assessments use different methodology depending on who is writing and designing them. There isn't a lot of training in EIA. Yeah, it's even in environmental science degree courses, it's limited. It's not a degree subject in its own right. And that's led to the idea that some of the companies undertaking these EIAs do not have enough specialist knowledge. It's sometimes very difficult to define the boundaries of impacts, and quite often it doesn't include indirect impacts. Okay, an ecological footprint. This can be thought of as the area of land on the planet that you are using up in your resources. How much of our planet do you need to use? According to the Global Footprint Network, the human population requires 1.7 planets to maintain what we're currently doing. Our current resource use is unsustainable. We are using the planet's resources faster than they can be replenished. Okay, on that happy note, these are the works used, and again, they've been cited in MLA2. Thanks a lot.